Hey, it's Carrie, and this is Beyond the Accent, the podcast where we explore voice, identity, and the beautiful, unpredictable, deeply layered experience of speaking another language. Today we're diving into two very quiet, very powerful elements, the voice inside your head and the silences between your words. We'll be talking about the language and accent of your inner monologue, how bilingual brains switch voices depending on mood, context, or memory, why reading in English may feel strange at first, and what that reveals about fluency, how silence functions very differently across cultures, why pauses, just like pitch and rhythm, carry deep, often unspoken meaning. Settle in. Let's begin with the voice you hear when you read. We all have an inner voice, that silent narrator that reads to us, that thinks with us, sometimes judges us a little, and occasionally breaks into a song lyric from 2003, let's say. For most monolinguals, that voice is easy to ignore because it feels so natural. But for those of us who speak more than one language, that voice becomes a character in its own right. What language does your inner voice speak? And more importantly, what accent does it have? Research by Viorica Marion and colleagues has explored this in fascinating ways. One of her team's key findings was something called language-dependent memory, the idea that memories are easier to recall in the language in which they were encoded. So if you lived through a breakup in Russian, the emotional textures of that memory might feel fuzzier or more abstract if you try to recall it in English, and vice versa. And in 2018, a study published in the International Journal of Bilingualism found that bilinguals often switch their inner voice, their internal speech, based on mood, social context, and even geography. You might think in French while traveling, Hebrew while cooking, English while answering emails, and Russian when you're swearing at your internet provider. Whatever those domains are, the languages are going to be different, most probably. If you were to ask me what my phone number is that I have here in the States, and you're going to ask me in Russian, and you're going to expect me to deliver it in Russian, it'll be a problem because the language that it was encoded in, that's the language that my brain wants to deliver it in. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and I know that research supports that, if someone asks you to count in a language that isn't your first language, or rather the language that you were taught math in, actually count objects in front of you, let's say, it might prove to be a problem. Now, let's talk about the voice you hear when you read. When you read in English, do you hear an English-speaking voice in your head? Is it your voice? Is it someone else's? Does it have a foreign accent? A native one of sorts? Does it shift from paragraph to paragraph? Studies by Elderson Day and Fernihue show that inner speech varies wildly across people. Some people have a clear, consistent inner narrator. Others experience more abstract sensations like images, feelings, snippets of rhythm. It's not always a voice in the traditional sense, But here's where it gets interesting. Inner speech in your target language can actually improve your fluency. Engaging in silent reading or thought in English, not translating into your native language, your first language, but thinking in English, it can help rewire your phonological loop. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes. And the more natural it becomes, the more you start to hear the rhythm of English in the way you move through a sentence. And yes, the rhythm of your inner voice matters because when your inner rhythm is off, when your reading voice still sounds syllable by syllable, let's say, or overly formal or disconnected from stress patterns, that carries over into your speech. One thing I've noticed in my own life, I hear a different narrator depending on what I'm reading. So poetry brings out a different voice than a news article. And when I read fiction in English, the character's voice takes over. So maybe ask yourself this. When you read a book, are you hearing the author's voice or your own voice doing an impression? Either is fine. Now, This all ties into identity, and this podcast and myself, we're all about identity. Multiple studies and a ton of anecdotal accounts have shown that people often feel different depending on the language they're speaking. So yeah, there's some evidence to back this up. You might feel more assertive, say in English, more poetic in Spanish, more sarcastic in Russian, whatever that distribution is for you. It will vary from person to person. This isn't just language affects thought, though. This is language affects who you are in that moment. Your written voice and your inner narrator are a part of that. And in case you're wondering, yes, it is completely normal to sound like 2 or 3 different people in your own head. Welcome to the multilingual mind. Now let's talk about something else inside us. Silence. Because just like rhythm and accent and melody, silence is deeply cultural. Let's begin with a simple idea. Not all silences mean the same thing. In the US, for instance, a pause in conversation is often filled immediately. If someone doesn't respond right away, we might interpret that as awkwardness, disapproval, or even disconnection. But in Japanese culture and many other high-context communication cultures, a pause can signal thoughtfulness, respect, or emotional depth. Researchers looked at the average timing between turns in conversation across 10 different languages. Japanese speakers tended to respond more quickly than Danish speakers, for instance, but with longer stretches of shared silence when needed. And here's the kicker. Across cultures, the length of acceptable silence varies dramatically, but each culture believes its own is the normal one, which leads to miscommunication a whole lot of the time. Just got to be aware of that. For instance, I was getting a manicure yesterday, and the girl that I was getting it from, she's a Russian speaker, so we eventually switched to Russian. And somehow the pauses that she was making whenever I asked a question or made a comment, they did seem a bit too long for me. I got used to it. You know, you adjust. She kind of adjusted a little bit. We sort of co-adjusted, right, to one another's pace. But yes, as an English speaker, I very much expect that kind of immediacy in response. That means we're doing okay, you know? Anthropologist Edward Hall introduced the idea of high context and low context cultures. Neither of them is better or worse in any way. High context cultures like Japan, China, and many Arab and Latin American societies, a lot of meaning is carried in what's not said. Pauses, intonation, context, and body language are essential. In low context cultures like the US, Germany, or Scandinavia, clarity is king. Words need to say what they mean. Pauses are often seen as gaps, not features. This framework is far from perfect, right? And it helps explain why some learners might feel that they're not fast enough in a given moment or too intense because they're trying to figure it out. Depending on the context they're speaking in, it might feel like, okay, their own pace is off. So yeah, a lot of the times it's not about vocab, grammar, all the conventional portions of what one's language skills are, right? It's the pragmatics of it. It's your cultural rhythm that you've got to also try and observe. How do we navigate this? First, know that silence is not empty. It's not a flaw. It's not something to be ashamed of. If you're from a culture where silence is sacred and you're learning English, understand that your pauses might be misread, but don't erase them. Learn when to lean into them and when to kind of adjust a little bit. If you're from a talk-feeling culture and you learn a language like Japanese, learn to let the pause land. It might feel terrifying at first, but there's beauty in the space between sentences. Because silence, just like rhythm, is part of a language's music. And learning to speak another language means learning to hear a new kind of silence, you know? So let's bring it back to you. What does your inner voice sound like when you read in English? Do you give yourself time to pause? Do you trust silence to hold you the way words do? Your rhythm, internal and external, is part of your language identity. And the more you become aware of it, the more freedom you'll have to shape it. Let your inner voice evolve. Let your silences be intentional. And as always, you don't need to sound like someone you're not. You just need to find your own music, whatever the language. This was Beyond the Accent. Carrie, your host. I'll be talking to you in a week's time. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye now.